for getting an Anglican Studies program. So that's what I'm doing right now. My background and what brings me here is that I served as the president of the House of Deputies of the Episcopal Church General Convention, which I'll tell you a little bit more about how General Convention actually works. If you get bored, just give me a sign and I'll stop. But the General Convention happens every 3 years. It's the legislative body that makes the decisions around the important work that we do in the church. It recently has voted at the last General Convention, which was in Austin this last summer, to revise the Book of Common Prayer, which will affect all of you, all of us. It will be exciting and good, and we'll see what happens. There's going to be a long period of trying and input and all of that. And then also the marriage canon has been changed, was changed at General Convention to allow for same-sex couples being married in the congregations without having to get specific permission from their bishop. And because we have 103 dioceses in the Episcopal Church, and some of the bishops aren't as flexible as others, and so some of the priests were running into some trouble to be able to perform marriage ceremonies in their own parish. So that's in trial use right now. But those are just a couple of examples of how General Convention affects the life of everyday parishioners. So I'm going to get my notes. I can find them. The wrong thing. I'm going to tell you a little bit about General Convention and how it works. It can be called a legislature. It could also be called a family reunion, or a marketplace of ideas and products, or a very large congregation, or all of the above. And no matter how you describe General Convention, to experience it is to experience the Episcopal Church and a web of relationships. I remember when my husband went with me to one General Convention, and he was sitting out kind of in a lobby. It's huge, by the way. The House of Deputies has over 800 members, 4 clergy and 4 lay people from each of the dioceses. They're all elected, and then they elect a president every 3 years. And that person it was my pleasure to serve as the president of that house. And we make a lot of decisions together. It's a bicameral legislative system, the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops. The House of Bishops is about 129 present at the last General Convention. There's 311 bishops, active and retired. And they're all eligible to vote in the House of Bishops. But in order to pass any legislation in General Convention, it has to be approved, voted on, by both houses. So one house could stop a piece of legislation from going through, but luckily the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies have agreed on what I mentioned to you a few minutes ago. So we have a long history of having General Conventions. Our first one was in 1785 in Philadelphia. I did. Yes, I crawled in there and cried the whole time. The House of Deputies was composed of at that time by a lot fewer than it is composed of right now. And the work of General Convention includes several things: adopting legislation of concern to the Church, amending the Book of Common Prayer. We have a constitution, amending the canons of the church. The canons are our quote-unquote rules that we go by. Adopting a triennial budget for the Episcopal Church. Electing candidates to offices, boards, and other committees. And this work is undertaken in support of the mission and ministry of the church. So every 3 years, the General Convention meets together. They have legislative committees. The committees are appointed jointly by the President of the House of Deputies and the presiding bishop. And the two of them sit and go through the lists of deputies and bishops and appoint people that they believe are gifted or that have applied to be on these legislative committees. I think I gave you a list of legislative committees somewhere. There's 22, I think, and then there's special committees as well. And all of those, if you take a glance over that list of the legislative committees, you'll get an idea of how many legislative committees there are. So picture in your mind's eye that there may be 20 people on each one of these legislative committees. And they meet during convention, and they have legislation that's been generated by groups during the triennium. That's during the 3 years that convention doesn't meet. So all that while, there are people addressing the resolutions that came up at the last General Convention and they're charged by General Convention to do work during the triennium. They do their work, they come back with proposed legislation, and it goes into a big thick book called the Blue Book. And all the people that are coming to General Convention read that, ask questions, go to open hearings on each piece of legislation, and then the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies meet at the same time in different locations in the same place. And they debate the legislation. Now, I think it might sound a little confusing, but it actually is, it works pretty well in that there's a House of Initial Action. So let's say we had a resolution that had to do with the marriage rights. The House of Initial Action is the House of Bishops. So the House of Bishops on that piece of legislation considers that first. If they say no, it never comes to the House of Deputies. On other pieces of legislation, the House of Deputies is the House of Initial Action. If we say no, it never goes to the House of Bishops. Or if we say yes, and it goes to the House of Bishops, and they make an amendment, it comes back to the House of Deputies. So there's a little bit of ping pong going on with regards to pieces of legislation, but things actually do get passed. If there are things that are extremely contentious, there will be two groups appointed. One group appointed by the presiding bishop, and one group appointed by the president of the House of Deputies, and that's called a cognate committee. And those two groups meet together to try to hammer it out. And then when they have something to present, they bring it back to their respective houses, and then it's reconsidered again. So that's how legislation comes up in the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops. The House of Deputies is, as I mentioned to you, is composed of 4 clergy and 4 lay people. They're voted on in their own diocese, and they each send an alternate. The deputies are called deputies for a specific reason. They're not delegates. They're deputized by their convention, by their own diocesan convention. They're deputized to vote their conscience. They're not delegated to vote whatever the people that elected them tell them to do, because they learn a lot at the General Convention. They're going to open hearings, hearing the debate, reading All of that is kind of an evolutionary process on getting information about the pieces of legislation. So the deputies are called deputies for a specific reason. So I've told you some details about it, but I want you to understand that with the exception of the Bible, the Book of Common Prayer, and the Constitution and canons, the General Convention is the ultimate authority in the Episcopal Church. The General Convention can rescind or create new canons, and I think in your one handout, if you don't have this, just if you want to go, if you actually want to know more about this, go on online and type in generalconvention.org, and there are links to all sorts of great information about what you can look at what the Constitution and canons are. If I know that the bishop is going to come and talk to you, so if you want to really be smart, you can read that ahead of time, and you can know what the canons say about the role of a bishop. He's going to probably talk to you about what his role is, and the bishops are required to abide by the Constitution and canons, just like we all are, as part of the church. So all of the bishops have a seat and voice in the House of Bishops. They meet twice a year beyond General Convention. So the House of Deputies only gets together once every 3 years. And the House of Bishops meets twice a year. And they're not supposed to do any legislation during that time. They have no authority to do legislation. So they might write a pastoral letter, or they might create there's the Bishops' Committee Against Gun Violence. So they might create some sort of special committee, and that works for them. And then they demonstrate some leadership in the church. The General Convention is one of the largest legislative bodies in the world. I know, it's pretty amazing. It's second only to, I believe that there's a legislative body in India that's larger than the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies General Convention. Every time the General Convention meets, there's a theme. And this year, the theme was three pillars to follow the way of Jesus. And as James talked this morning about Bishop Curry and the Jesus movement, the three pillars to follow are racial reconciliation and justice, evangelism, and creation care. So there were joint gatherings of bishops and deputies using the African Bible study method. They had talks, and when they have talks at the General Convention, the House of Bishops joins the House of Deputies, goes over there because the House of Bishops isn't big enough to hold both of the legislative bodies. The key issues that were discussed at this General Convention are immigration, gender issues, prayer book revision and trial use, which I mentioned to you earlier, Israel-Palestine relations, readmitting the Episcopal Church of Cuba as a diocese, which has been absent as a diocese since 1966. And it was adopted as a diocese of the Episcopal Church at this last General Convention. The convention also passed a $134 million budget and legislation on social justice and U.S. policy. Again, if you're interested in knowing what all the resolutions were that were passed and what they say, you can look them up by topic, and you can get them at generalconvention.org. They also, I heard you say this morning about the Texas place that some of you went, where children are being held. That was you, right? Oh, Katie, okay. That they took some time out from General Convention to go to have a revival service. If you've ever heard Bishop Curry preach, you know that's kind of a great thing to hear and a great place to go to a revival service. And they had one, and they drew 2,500 people to come and hear him. And then they went to the Don Hutton Detention Center, and they stood there and made a silent protest. So I've written a couple things about some legislation that was passed on this one handout that says what is General Convention, and you can take a look at that. Also, if you're interested in how the legislation gets passed, you can also look on the website, but I just wanted to mention to you that it's quite a, how would I describe it? It's quite an intensive process, and by the time it comes to the floor of the houses, whichever house is dealing with it, there's a lot of people that have a lot of things to say, as you might imagine. And we run the House of Deputies by parliamentary procedure. And when I was sitting in the chair, which was, every day out of 10 days, there would be, we have a time limit, and there's not a lot of people know about this because only the platform can see it, but there's a little camera, so when somebody gets up to a microphone to speak, it shows right in front of the President of the House of Deputies and tells what number they are in order. And then when I call on them, it also has their name because they have to have a badge and they scan their badge. And so when they come up to the microphone to speak, it says their name, and then as soon as I call on them, I say microphone 2, and then the person will start talking, and right then it starts timing how long they can talk, and they can only talk for 2 minutes. And when they come to 1 minute and 45 seconds, a little red line appears on the screen that everybody else can see. And then they say, "Oh, I'm running out of time." And then when they're completely out of time, their microphone goes off. So they'll think something's wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. So that's how it's run in the House of Deputies. And lots of times, also there's a Secretary of General Convention and a Dispatch of Business. Dispatch of Business is a committee. There's a chair. The person stands up and tells what's going to come next on the agenda, and then tells how much total time there is. And we decide that ahead of time before we go into the session. So it tells them how much time there is for the discussion of this topic. And then people can ask for an extension if they so wish. And then we vote on whether or not to extend the time. So as you can see, if you've been in parliamentary procedure meetings, it's a good way to run the meeting. It's fair, as long as everybody understands how it works. If people don't understand how it works, they don't take advantage of how to be heard. So we do have sessions beforehand about how things are going to happen, how it's going to work, and then I would give a summary of how that would happen during the convention and during the House of Deputies meetings. So let me ask you if you have any questions or comments, or if you're still awake. Yes, Barbara?
You mentioned that some resolutions or pieces of legislation go to the House of Deputies first, vice versa. How is that?
Okay.
Which one of those?
The question is, it's called the House of Initial Action, and how is it determined which house has the responsibility for hearing what first? So as in the Episcopal Church, it's because we've always done it that way. So all of the legislation that has to do with prayer book revision always goes, the House of Bishops is always the House of Initial Action. Anything that has to do with social justice, for instance, is always the House of Deputies. So there's a list of all the pieces of legislation of all the committees, and then it indicates which house will hear it first. Yeah, what path it's going to take. And it's really important, because if you have something that's highly controversial and it goes to a house that you don't think it's going to pass, you have to kind of think about that when you're writing the language in the legislation. So you might have to change it a little bit, and then plan for amendments once it gets to your house. Yes, James?
So Bonnie, speaking of, because we've always said it that way before, if you could wave your magic wand and change 3 things about the Episcopal Church / General Convention, what would they be?
The Episcopal Church or General Convention? Can you narrow that down a little bit?
Well, you said the General Convention is kind of the supreme authority in the Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
Presumably, if General Convention changed how parishes were organized or something, then that would be changing the Episcopal Church, right?
Okay, well, I would think that, first of all, I think that the General Convention, at this particular one, the 79th, the one that just happened, was the 79th General Convention. And I think that they've done a really great job of making the convention accessible to people who aren't there. And when I was, I retired from the job in 2012, and we were just on the cusp of getting things online, of making it available to everyone. Now, I didn't attend the General Convention this year. Yes. And I stayed home, but I could follow it easily, just like anybody else. And it was so great. You could get a virtual notebook. What you get as a deputy and bishops is you get a notebook, and it's this thick. And you've got, at least you used to, I don't think they use paper that much this time. And you can use this virtual notebook. Anybody can get one. It's online. And then you can follow what's happening every single day at General Convention. I watched or live streamed the conversations. There were conversations about sexual harassment. That was the primary concern of the House of Deputies, and they invited the bishops to come in, and you could watch it. It was, of course, you couldn't say anything. You couldn't, but you could yell at your spouse or your partner or something like that, but it was a little bit inhibiting. But you could actually watch it and be participatory. So I think that's really good. Back to your question, what I would change is I would try to get more people involved in participating, watching, and then, the deputies that we elect in the Diocese of Michigan, they are accountable to us. They are accountable to us. So they're required to make a report. They'll make the report at the Diocesan Convention. Did you go to the Diocesan Convention? Any of you? I know, James, you did. Was there a report, or has it been held since last summer? No.
No, it was in October, yeah.
It was in October,
yeah,
okay.
There was a report.
Did they
all
report?
stood up and everything, yeah.
Did anybody ask questions?
I can't
Of
remember.
them? Okay. So what I would change is I would get my deputation to be available to parishes, maybe through the body that you're a part of. Not only just the parish, but your group of parishes, convocations. And then talk about ask for a report. What happened? How did you vote? What were the issues? what else, what I would like to see at a general convention. Why don't we do it this way? That's what I would do. Waving the magic wand, I would fire everybody up to take some responsibility in making sure, and then you might feel like you're called to run for deputy, to be a deputy. So those deputies are elected at diocesan convention. Or you might feel called to volunteer at a general convention. There's like 600 slots for volunteers at general conventions. So you could go and stay there and have a little volunteer badge and meet everybody and see how it's going and stuff. And then next time you could run for deputy.